The old woman's hands were shaking as she knelt in the sand beside her empty date stall, not from age, though she was 73, but from hunger. 3 days without food, 7 days without a single sale, and now the landlord's men were coming to take even the wooden cart that was her only source of livelihood. But what happened next, in that dusty corner of Marrakech's Medina in 1969, would become the most witnessed miracle in the entire souk. Something so impossible that even the Jewish merchants and French tourists stopped to stare. Something that made the imam of the nearby mosque come running with tears streaming down his face. Because when Fatima al-Mansouri opened her cracked lips and began reciting the ruqyah of provision, the verses she had memorized as a child but never truly believed would work, the sand around her stall started to shimmer. And then, as dozens of witnesses would later swear on their lives, golden coins began appearing, one by one, pushing up through the sand like metal flowers blooming in fast motion. Why would an elderly widow who could barely read suddenly remember ancient verses of protection? What had blocked her sustenance for so many years that even her own children couldn't help her? And what did the coins reveal about the invisible world that surrounds us, the world of jinns, envy, and spiritual warfare that most people refuse to acknowledge? This story will shake everything you think you know about provision, faith, and the power hidden in the words of Allah. It will show you how generational curses work, how envy creates invisible chains around your sustenance, and how a single moment of true faith can break decades of spiritual blockage. I'm asking you to listen until the very end, because the lesson Fatima learned that day in the sand, surrounded by impossible coins and the shocked faces of an entire marketplace, is a lesson that could unlock the doors of provision in your own life. Before we continue, please make sure you're subscribed to this channel and leave a comment telling me which country you're watching from. Your engagement helps us share these powerful stories with more people around the world. Now, let me take you back to where this truly began. Not to that miraculous day in 1969, but to 40 years earlier, when a jealous sister spoke words that would curse an entire family's wealth. Fatima al-Mansouri was born into a family of date merchants in 1896, when Morocco was still under the sultans, and the French were just beginning their colonial occupation. Her father, Hassan al-Mansouri, owned 3 of the most prosperous date groves in the Draa Valley, the ancient river region famous for producing the sweetest dates in all of North Africa. The family lived well. Not wealthy by European standards, but comfortable, respected. Their dates were sold as far as Fez and Tangier. Hassan had 2 daughters, Fatima, the younger, and Zara, 3 years older. And Zara burned with a jealousy so intense it was almost visible. It started when Fatima turned 16. A young merchant from Casablanca visited their father's grove, and upon seeing Fatima arranging dates in woven baskets, asked Hassan for her hand in marriage. The merchant was handsome, educated, and came from a good family. He chose Fatima over Zara without hesitation. Zara's face went pale when she heard the news. That night, in the room they shared, she turned to her younger sister with eyes that reflected something darker than simple envy. "You always get everything," Zara whispered in the darkness. "The prettier face, father's attention, and now the best husband. But I swear by everything I hold sacred, you will never truly enjoy what you take from me. Your wealth will slip through your fingers like sand. Your children will struggle as I have struggled. Every dirham that comes to you will leave just as quickly." Fatima laughed it off. They were just words spoken in anger, weren't they? Sisters fought. Sisters made up. This was normal. But Zara hadn't finished. The next morning, she visited an old woman who lived on the outskirts of their village. A woman whispered about in fearful tones. Someone who knew how to speak to things that weren't entirely human. What Zara paid that woman. What words were exchanged. What agreements were made with beings of smokeless fire. Those details were lost to time. But from that day forward, Fatima's life changed in ways she wouldn't understand for 40 years. Her wedding took place as planned. Her husband Karim was everything she'd hoped. Kind, hard-working, devoted to Allah. They moved to Marrakech, where he opened a small shop selling textiles. They should have prospered. Every business decision Karim made was sound. He worked from sunrise to sunset. Fatima helped, managing the accounts with the mathematical skill her father had taught her. But the money never stayed. A shipment would arrive damaged. A trusted employee would steal. A customer would promise payment and disappear. Minor disasters, each one explainable on its own, but together forming a pattern of perpetual struggle. They weren't starving. Allah provided enough, but they never got ahead, never saved, never grew. Fatima had 6 children. She loved them fiercely, but she watched in growing horror as the same pattern repeated in their lives. Her eldest son opened a carpentry shop. It burned down. Her second son became a teacher. The school closed. Her daughters married. Their husbands struggled with mysterious illnesses that prevented them from working. It was as if an invisible hand pushed away every coin before it could settle in their palms. Karim died in 1955, exhausted from decades of work that produced so little. Fatima was 59 years old, alone, and had nothing but a small wooden cart and her knowledge of dates. Her children, trapped in their own struggles, could barely feed their own families, much less support their mother. So she returned to what she knew. She bought dates wholesale with the last of her savings and set up a small stall in the Medina near Jama el-Fna, the famous square where storytellers, musicians, and merchants had gathered for centuries. For 14 years, she worked that stall, and for 14 years the pattern continued. Some days she sold enough to eat, most days she didn't. While other date sellers thrived, customers would walk past Fatima's stall as if they couldn't see it. Or they would approach, reach for the dates, then suddenly change their minds and walk away with confused expressions. "It's like something pushes people away from me," Fatima confided to her neighbor, an elderly Jewish merchant named Abraham who sold leather goods. "I don't understand it, Abraham. My dates are fresh, my prices are fair, but it's as if I'm invisible." Abraham, who had watched Fatima struggle for over a decade, had his own suspicions. He'd seen this before, the unmistakable signs of spiritual blockage. But he was not Muslim, and these were matters best handled by someone of her own faith. "Have you ever consulted an imam?" he asked gently. "Or a raqi, someone who knows ruqyah?" Fatima shook her head. She prayed 5 times a day, fasted during Ramadan, gave what little charity she could afford. But the world of jinns, evil eye, and spiritual warfare, she'd always considered that the domain of superstitious village women, not educated people like herself. "I believe in Allah," she said firmly, "not in magic and spells." Abraham smiled sadly. "Believing in Allah and believing in the unseen things He created are not contradictory, my dear friend. The Quran speaks of them. Perhaps your struggle is not material, but spiritual?" Fatima dismissed his words, but they planted a seed. A small doubt that would, in time, grow into understanding. The real turning point came in June 1969, during the hottest week of summer, when Fatima's struggles reached their breaking point and she discovered that sometimes the invisible walls around our lives are more real than the ones we can touch. The heat in Marrakesh that June was merciless, the kind of heat that made the ancient red walls of the Medina shimmer like they were melting. Tourists fled to their riads during midday. Even the hardiest merchants closed their stalls for afternoon prayers and rest. But Fatima couldn't afford to close. She'd sold nothing for 3 days straight, her stomach cramped with hunger. She'd given her last piece of bread to a beggar child 2 days ago, unable to watch him cry. Her water skin was empty, and this morning, her landlord had sent 2 men to her tiny room in the workers' quarter. 3 months behind on rent, the taller one said, not unkindly. He knew Fatima, had watched her struggle. "Hajj Mustafa says, if you don't pay by Friday, we take your belongings, the cart included." Friday was tomorrow. Without the cart, she had no business. Without business, she had no way to eat. At 73, too old for other work, what options remained? Her children were drowning in their own difficulties. She couldn't burden them further. The thought of begging made her soul recoil. She had been Hassan al-Mansuri's daughter, wife to an honest merchant, mother of 6. Now she would end her days as a beggar? She sat behind her unsold dates as the afternoon call to prayer echoed from the Kutubiyya Mosque. The familiar words washed over her, but for the first time in her life, they brought no comfort, only desperate questions. "Ya Allah," she whispered, tears making tracks through the dust on her weathered face. "What have I done to deserve this? I've prayed. I've fasted. I've tried to live righteously. Why do you allow me to suffer like this? Why has your provision been closed to me my entire life?" A shadow fell across her stall. Fatima looked up, hoping for a customer. Instead, she saw a woman she'd never noticed before, ancient beyond reckoning, wrapped in layers of faded indigo fabric, her face a map of wrinkles. But her eyes were sharp and knowing. "You're asking the wrong question, daughter," the old woman said in a dialect so pure and classical it sounded like it came from another century. Fatima wiped her tears hastily. "I'm sorry? You ask what you've done, but you haven't done anything." The old woman picked up one of Fatima's dates, examining it with the expert eye of someone who'd handled thousands. "The question is, what was done to you?" A chill ran down Fatima's spine despite the oppressive heat. "I don't understand." The old woman set down the date and fixed Fatima with a gaze that seemed to see through skin and bone. "How long have you struggled, daughter? Your whole life? Your parents before you? Or did it start at a specific moment, perhaps when someone close to you wished you harm?" Fatima's mouth went dry. A memory surfaced, one she'd buried for decades, Zara's face in the darkness of their shared room. Those whispered words, "Your wealth will slip through your fingers like sand." "My sister," Fatima breathed. "But that was 40 years ago, just words spoken in anger." "Words carry power," the old woman said. "Especially words spoken with intense emotion, especially when those words find listeners in the unseen world. Tell me, did your sister visit anyone after speaking those words? An old woman, perhaps? Someone known for dealing with things that aren't entirely human?" Fatima's hand went to her mouth. "How do you know this?" "Because I can see it on you. Like chains made of shadow wrapped around your provision. Every coin that tries to reach you hits an invisible wall and bounces away. You work, but others reap. You plant, but others harvest. Classic signs of spiritual blockage through envy and jinn interference." The marketplace spun around Fatima. All these years, all this suffering, not bad luck, not Allah's punishment, but the result of her sister's jealous curse? "But Zara died 10 years ago," Fatima said weakly. "Surely it ended with her?" The old woman shook her head. "These things don't end automatically. The jinns who were sent to block your provision, they're still there. They've been there for 40 years, like guards at a gate, turning away your sustenance. They'll remain until someone breaks the agreement your sister made with them." "How?" Fatima grabbed the woman's arm. "How do I break it? Please, I'm losing everything tomorrow." "My cart, my only way to survive." "There's only one way," the old woman said gently. "Not magic, not counter curses, not deals with other jinns. Those paths lead only to more darkness. The only thing powerful enough to break spiritual chains forged in envy is the pure word of Allah, ruqyah, the verses of protection and provision recited with complete faith." She reached into her robes and pulled out a worn piece of paper, its edges soft from age. "This is the ruqyah of provision. My grandmother taught it to me, and her grandmother before that. It contains verses from Surah Al-Waqiyah, Surah Ar-Rahman, Ayat Al-Kursi, verses that remind the unseen world that all provision comes from Allah alone, and no creation, human or jinn, can block what Allah wills to provide." Fatima took the paper with trembling hands. The Arabic script was beautiful, written in an old style she could barely read. "But I'm not educated," she protested. "I can barely—" "You don't need to be educated. You need to have faith, real faith. Not the faith of routine prayers and habitual fasting, but the faith that believes, truly believes, that Allah hears you, sees you, and has the power to change your situation in an instant." The old woman stood, preparing to leave. "Tomorrow morning, before dawn, go to your stall, recite these verses 7 times, and believe, daughter. Believe with every fiber of your being that Allah's provision cannot be blocked by any creation." "Wait!" Fatima called as the woman turned. "Who are you? Why are you helping me?" The old woman smiled, and for a moment Fatima could have sworn she saw sadness in those ancient eyes. "Let's just say I know what it's like to watch someone suffer under a curse they didn't deserve. Learn from this. Fatima al-Mansuri. When Allah opens the door, and He will, remember that envy is a poison that destroys both the envier and the envied. Break the cycle." And then she was gone, disappearing into the crowded Medina like smoke dissolving in wind. Fatima sat alone with the paper in her hands, her heart pounding. Part of her wanted to dismiss this as the ramblings of a superstitious old woman. But another part, the part that had watched her entire life crumble for no logical reason, wondered, what if it was true? That night, unable to sleep in her tiny room, Fatima lit her last candle and studied the verses on the paper. She recognized some of them, pieces of Surah al-Ruqyah she'd heard recited at funerals, Ayat al-Kursi that every Muslim knew by heart. But arranged this way, as a cohesive prayer for provision and protection, they seemed to carry a weight she'd never felt before. Could words really break invisible chains? Could faith really shatter walls built by envy and sustained by jinns? Tomorrow morning would reveal the answer. But as Fatima finally drifted into fitful sleep, she didn't know that she was about to become part of a miracle that would be talked about in the Medinas of Morocco for generations. Fatima woke before dawn, her body trained by decades of pre-Fajr prayer. Her stomach was hollow with hunger. Her lips were cracked from thirst. But something had shifted inside her during the night, a strange mixture of desperation and determination that felt almost like the faith the old woman had described. She performed wudu with the last water in her pitcher, feeling the cool liquid wash away not just physical dirt, but some of the spiritual weight she'd carried for so long. She prayed Fajr with an intensity she hadn't felt in years, tears streaming down her face as she whispered her needs to Allah. Then, as the first gray light of dawn began to touch the sky, she made her way through the empty streets to the Medina. The square was deserted at this hour. Even the cats were still sleeping. The ancient walls seemed to watch her as she approached her small stall, where unsold dates from yesterday still sat in their woven baskets. She knelt in the sand beside her cart, pulled out the worn paper the old woman had given her, and began to read by the growing light. Her Arabic was rough, unpracticed. She stumbled over words she didn't recognize, but she read with her whole heart, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. When the event comes to pass, there is no denying its occurrence. And the companions of the right, how fortunate are the companions of the right? The verses of Surah al-Ruqyah rolled off her tongue, speaking of paradise, of provision, of Allah's absolute power over all creation. Then came the verses of Surah ar-Rahman. So which of the favors of your Lord would you deny? Everyone upon the earth will perish, and there will remain the face of your Lord, owner of majesty and honor. And finally, Ayat al-Kursi, the throne verse that every Muslim knew, protected against evil. Allah, there is no deity except Him, the ever-living, the sustainer of existence. Neither drowsiness overtakes Him, nor sleep. She completed the full recitation once, then began again. 7 times, the old woman had said, 7 times to break 40 years of spiritual blockage. By the 3rd recitation, something changed. The air around Fatima seemed to thicken, to become almost liquid. She could swear she heard whispers in languages she didn't know, angry chittering sounds like insects disturbed from their nest. The hair on her arms stood up, but she didn't stop. She kept reading, her voice growing stronger. By the 5th recitation, the whispers became almost screams. The wind picked up suddenly, unnaturally, swirling the sand around her stall in small cyclones. Her candles, she'd brought 3 to light her reading, flickered and almost went out. And then Fatima saw them. Shadows that moved wrong, shapes that were almost human but not quite, with too many joints in their limbs and eyes that reflected light like an animal's. They surrounded her stall. She counted 7 of them, and they were angry, furious, like guards who'd been stationed at a gate for 40 years and were now being dismissed. Fear tried to grip her heart. These were jinns, real jinns. The invisible guards that had blocked her provision for 4 decades were now visible, and they were not happy about being banished. But Fatima had spent 73 years struggling, 73 years watching her family suffer, 73 years of unexplained failures and mysterious losses. Enough was enough. "In the name of Allah, the most merciful," she shouted, her voice echoing across the empty square. "You have no authority here. Allah is my provider, not you. Return to where you came from." She began the 6th recitation, and this time her voice didn't waver. The shadows writhed and hissed, but they began to fade. One by one, like smoke being blown away by wind, they dissipated into the morning air. By the time she started the 7th and final recitation, the square was peaceful again. The unnatural wind had stopped. the whispers were gone. And Fatima felt something she hadn't felt in so long, she'd almost forgotten what it was like. Freedom. She finished the last verse of Ayat al-Kursi and sat back on her heels, breathing hard. The sun was just beginning to peek over the ancient walls of the Medina, painting everything in shades of gold and orange. And that's when the miracle began. At first, Fatima thought it was just the dawn light playing tricks, the way the sand around her stall seemed to glimmer and sparkle. But then she looked closer and saw something impossible. A coin was emerging from the sand, slowly, as if being pushed up from below. An old silver dirham, the kind that hadn't been minted in decades. It broke through the surface of the sand and lay there, gleaming in the morning light. Fatima stared at it, her mind refusing to accept what her eyes were seeing. Then another coin appeared, 2 feet away, pushing up through the sand like a metal mushroom. Then another, and another. Within minutes, dozens of coins surrounded her stall. Old ones, new ones, silver and copper, and even a few gold. They seemed to be materializing from nowhere, or perhaps from everywhere. Payment for 40 years of stolen provision, all arriving at once. Fatima began to sob, not from sadness, but from overwhelming emotion. Gratitude, shock, vindication, relief. She reached for the nearest coin with shaking hands, half expecting it to vanish like a dream. But it was solid, real. She could feel the weight of it, the coolness of the metal, the raised Arabic script along its edge. Subhanallah, she whispered. Subhanallah. She didn't know that several merchants were now arriving for morning setup and had stopped dead in their tracks, staring at the impossible sight of money appearing from sand. She didn't know that within hours, word of the miracle would spread through the entire Medina. She didn't know that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't imagine. All she knew in that moment was that Allah had heard her. After 40 years of silence, after decades of unanswered questions, He had answered in the most dramatic way possible. But the miracle was far from over. The coins were just the beginning. Because when you break spiritual blockage that has lasted for decades, the floodgates of provision don't just crack open, they burst. Abraham arrived at his leather goods stall at his usual time, just after sunrise, and found half the Medina crowded around Fatima's date cart. His first thought was that something terrible had happened. Had she collapsed from hunger? Had the landlord's men come to take her cart early? He pushed through the murmuring crowd and froze. Fatima was sitting on the ground, surrounded by coins, hundreds of them. They covered the sand around her stall like a metallic carpet, glinting in the morning sun. And more were still appearing. He watched, stunned, as a gold dinar pushed its way up through the sand right before his eyes. What in the name of... Abraham breathed. It's a miracle, someone whispered. Allah has answered her prayers. Impossible, a French tourist said, snapping photographs frantically. There must be a trick. Someone buried money here as a prank. But Abraham, who had known Fatima for 14 years, who had watched her struggle day after day, recognized this for what it was: divine intervention. The kind of intervention that only happened when spiritual blockages were broken. He knelt beside his old friend. Fatima, are you all right? She looked at him with tears streaming down her face. Abraham, I saw them. The jinns that were blocking my provision. I saw them, and I drove them away with the words of Allah. And now this. The coins kept coming. All morning they appeared, one after another, an impossible wealth materializing from nowhere. The crowd grew. The imam from the Kutubiyya mosque arrived, drawn by the commotion. He examined the scene with wise, knowing eyes, and then did something that surprised everyone. He smiled. This is ruqyah's work, he said quietly to those close enough to hear. Spiritual blockage broken by faith in Allah's words. I've heard of such things, but never witnessed it myself. By midday, Fatima had collected more money than she'd earned in the past 10 years combined. The coins finally stopped appearing around noon, but by then, the damage, or rather the blessing, was done. She had enough to pay her rent, buy wholesale dates, and still have savings left over. But the real mystery was just beginning. Because the next morning, when Fatima set up her stall with fresh dates purchased with her miracle money, something else changed. People could see her now. Customers who had walked past her cart for years suddenly noticed her. They approached with curious smiles. They bought her dates, not just one or two, but whole baskets at a time. By the end of the first day, she'd sold more than in the entire previous month. "Your dates taste different," one woman said. "Sweeter, more blessed somehow." Fatima examined her own merchandise in confusion. They were the same dates from the same wholesaler. Nothing had changed, except that the invisible wall that had kept customers away was gone. Word of the miracle spread beyond the Medina. Newspaper reporters arrived, asking questions. A television crew from Casablanca wanted to interview her. The French tourists who'd witnessed the coins appearing came back with anthropologists and professors, all trying to explain the unexplainable. But while the city buzzed with talk of miracles and mysteries, Fatima noticed something else. Something that filled her with both joy and trepidation. Her children were calling. Her eldest son, Ahmed, called on the third day after the miracle. "Mama, something strange happened. The carpentry shop, the one that burned down 15 years ago? The insurance company just contacted me. They found an error in their records. They owe me compensation. After 15 years, Mama, enough to rebuild," her second son called next. "Mama, I don't understand it. The school closed because of budget cuts, remember? Well, a wealthy philanthropist just donated enough money to reopen it. They want me back as head teacher, with back pay for the years I was unemployed." One by one, her children reported similar miracles. Old debts forgiven, lost jobs restored, mysterious windfalls. It was as if the breaking of Fatima's curse had shattered the chains on her entire family. But on the 7th day after the coins appeared, something happened that made Fatima realize the full scope of what she'd unleashed. She was closing her stall for evening prayer when a woman approached, middle-aged, wearing expensive clothes, but with eyes full of barely contained rage. "You're Fatima al-Mansouri?" the woman demanded. "Yes. How can I help you?" "I'm Yasmin, Zara's daughter, your niece." The woman's hands were clenched into fists. "What did you do? My mother's been dead for 10 years, but 2 days ago I started having dreams. Terrible dreams where she's trapped in fire, screaming about a broken contract. And my business, my successful import business that's thrived for 20 years, suddenly I'm losing clients left and right. Money I had in the bank has mysteriously disappeared. It's like everything is falling apart." Fatima's blood went cold. Yasmin, Zara's only daughter. She hadn't seen her niece in over a decade. "I don't understand," Fatima said carefully. "Don't lie to me." Yasmin stepped closer. "Everyone in Marrakesh is talking about your miracle, about how coins appeared from sand, about how your family's fortunes suddenly reversed. And meanwhile, everything my mother built for me is crumbling. This isn't coincidence. What did you do?" The imam from the Kutubia mosque chose that moment to pass by, and he must have sensed the tension because he stopped. "Is there a problem here, sisters?" Yasmin spun toward him. "This woman broke something, some kind of spiritual contract, and now my mother's suffering in her grave, and I'm paying the price." The imam's expression grew serious. "Your mother's name was Zara?" "Yes. How did you—" "Come with me," the imam said gently but firmly. "Both of you. This is a matter that requires understanding, not anger. And young woman, if your mother is suffering in her grave, it's not because of what Fatima did. It's because of what your mother chose to do 40 years ago." As they walked toward the mosque, the sun setting behind them, painting the Medina in shades of blood and gold, Fatima realized that breaking a curse was more complicated than she'd thought. The spiritual chains that had bound her family for decades hadn't just vanished. They'd snapped back on those who'd forged them in the first place. And now, her sister's daughter wanted answers. Answers that would require Fatima to relive the darkest moment of her family's history and confront a truth she'd buried for 40 years. That jealousy doesn't just harm its victim, it destroys the envié most of all. The imam's study was a simple room overlooking the courtyard of the Kutubia mosque. Shelves lined the walls packed with books, classical tafsirs, hadith collections, texts on fiqh and spirituality. He gestured for Fatima and Yasmin to sit on cushions while he prepared mint tea, the traditional Moroccan way of easing into difficult conversations. "Before we speak of curses and contracts," the imam began, pouring tea into 3 small glasses, "we must understand what actually happened. Yasmin, your mother visited someone 40 years ago, someone who knew how to make agreements with jinns. Do you know this?" Yasmin's anger faltered. "No, my mother she was pious. She prayed, fasted. Many people who engage with jinns also perform religious duties. the Imam interrupted gently. The two aren't mutually exclusive. Shaitan himself worshipped Allah for thousands of years before his arrogance led him astray. Your mother made a terrible choice out of jealousy, and now you're experiencing the consequences. He turned to Fatima. Tell her what your sister did. So Fatima did. She recounted that night 40 years ago when Zara had whispered her curse, the visit to the old woman the next morning, the 40 years of inexplicable poverty that followed, the patterns that repeated in her children's lives, all of it. Yasmin listened with growing horror. But why would she? We had everything. My father was successful. I grew up wealthy. Did you? The Imam asked pointedly. Or did you grow up with money that should have gone to your aunt's family? Provision that was redirected through jinn interference? The question hung in the air like smoke. Yasmin's face paled. You're saying my entire life, my business, my wealth, it was all stolen? Built on my mother's curse? Not stolen directly, the Imam clarified. But when someone uses jinns to block another person's provision, that blocked wealth has to go somewhere. It flows along the path of least resistance, usually to the person who initiated the curse or their family. You benefited from your mother's black deed, even if you didn't know it. This can't be happening, Yasmin whispered. Everything I've worked for was built on a foundation of envy and spiritual theft, Fatima said, and despite everything, she felt pity for her niece. I'm sorry, Yasmin. I truly am. But I didn't break the curse to harm you. I broke it to survive. The Imam sipped his tea thoughtfully. The question now is, what happens next? Yasmin, you have two choices. You can be angry, resist what's happening, and watch everything continue to crumble. Or you can do what your mother should have done 40 years ago. Repent on her behalf, make amends, and ask Allah for forgiveness. The jinns who served your mother's contract are now turning on her bloodline because the contract was broken. But if you willingly release any claim to wealth gained through that contract, you might find that Allah provides for you through halal means instead. Release my claim? Yasmin's voice rose. I'll lose everything. You've already lost everything, the Imam said bluntly. The money is disappearing whether you like it or not. The only question is whether you lose it as a victim or as someone choosing to do the right thing. One path leads to continued suffering. The other leads to peace and potentially new blessings earned through honest means. Silence filled the room. Fatima watched her niece struggle with the truth, seeing her own face 40 years ago when she'd first realized something invisible was controlling her life. Finally, Yasmin spoke, her voice breaking. What do I need to do? The Imam smiled sadly. First, you need to understand what your mother did, fully. And for that, we need to find the woman she consulted. If she's still alive. After 40 years? Fatima asked. She'd be ancient by now. If she's even... Sorcerers who deal with jinns don't age normally, the Imam said. The entities they work with sustain them, keep them alive far beyond natural lifespan. It's one of the prices they pay. Living longer, but trapped in service to beings who care nothing for them. If the woman is still alive, she'll be in the same place. They never leave. They can't. He stood, retrieving a worn notebook from his shelf. I keep records of known practitioners in the region, not to endorse them, but to know where the spiritual dangers lie. There's a woman in the village of Tamantit, about 30 kilometers south. She's been there for over 60 years according to my records. Calls herself Aisha the Listener. If this is the same woman your mother consulted, Yasmin, she'll know the exact terms of the contract, and maybe, she'll help us fully undo it. Why would she help? Yasmin asked. Because, the Imam said grimly, when a contract she brokered is broken without her knowledge, the jinns involved often blame her. She's probably suffering consequences herself and will be motivated to clean up the mess properly. These spiritual entanglements don't end cleanly unless all parties formally dissolve the agreement. Fatima felt her heart sink. You're saying I need to visit a sorceress? I'm saying we all do, tomorrow, and we'll bring protection, Quranic verses, pure intention, and the knowledge that we go not to participate in shirk, but to undo it. The Imam looked at both women seriously. Are you prepared to face what your family created 40 years ago? To see the full extent of the spiritual damage? Because once we start this process, there's no turning back. The truth, when fully revealed, is often harder to bear than comfortable ignorance. That night, Fatima couldn't sleep. She lay on her thin mattress in her small room, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what tomorrow would bring, visiting a sorceress, confronting the woman who'd helped destroy her life, seeing the jinns who'd tormented her family for 4 decades. Part of her wanted to refuse, to say the curse was broken and that was enough. But she thought about her sister, Zara, who died 10 years ago and was now apparently suffering in her grave. Zara, who'd been consumed by jealousy so intense she'd sold part of her soul to harm her own blood. And Fatima realized something profound. Forgiveness wasn't just about releasing the person who wronged you. Sometimes forgiveness meant doing the hard work to ensure they could find peace too, even after death. Tomorrow, she whispered to the darkness, I'll face what you did, sister, and I'll try to free you from it. Outside her window, the call to Fajr began to echo across the sleeping city. A new day was coming, a day of revelation and reckoning, a day when Fatima would learn that the invisible world was far more complex and far more terrifying than she'd ever imagined. The drive to Tamantit took them through desert landscape that seemed unchanged since the time of the Prophet. Red earth, scattered palms, and ancient kasbahs crumbling under the weight of centuries. The Imam drove his old Peugeot carefully along the dirt road while Fatima and Yasmin sat in tense silence. What if she refuses to help? Yasmin asked suddenly. Then we'll deal with that when it happens, the Imam replied. But understand something. People like Aisha the listener aren't evil in the way you might think. They're trapped. Many of them started innocently, trying to help people or make money, and got entangled with forces they couldn't escape. Some of them welcome the chance to undo their work, even if they can't stop doing it. The village appeared suddenly, a cluster of mud brick houses, barely distinguishable from the desert itself. The Imam parked near what looked like the village well, and an old man sitting in the shade immediately stood up, eyeing them warily. We seek Aisha the listener, the Imam said respectfully. Is she still here? The old man's expression became guarded. Why do you ask about her? We come not to use her services, but to undo something done 40 years ago. A contract that needs breaking. The old man studied them for a long moment, then pointed to a house at the edge of the village, set slightly apart from the others. She's there, but be warned, she's not been well since the new moon. Something's angered her companions. They approached the isolated house, and Fatima felt her skin prickle. The air around it felt wrong, thick and oppressive despite the desert heat. Strange symbols were carved into the doorframe, not Arabic, not any language she recognized. The Imam knocked firmly. Aisha bint Hassan, we come seeking knowledge, not power. We mean you no harm. For a long moment, nothing. Then the door opened a crack, and an eye peered out, ancient, yellowed, but sharp with intelligence. I know why you're here, a voice croaked. The one whose curse was broken. I've been expecting you. The door swung open fully, revealing a woman who should have been dead. Her skin was like parchment stretched over bone. Her hands were gnarled and spotted with age, but she moved with unnatural fluidity as she beckoned them inside. The interior was dark, lit only by dozens of candles. Talismans hung from the ceiling, bones, feathers, stones with writing carved on them. In the corner, Fatima could swear she saw shadows moving independently of any light source. Sit, Aisha commanded, and they obeyed, settling onto worn cushions around a low table covered with sand, the same kind of sand that had produced Fatima's miracle coins. 40 years ago, Aisha began without preamble, a woman came to me burning with jealousy. She wanted her younger sister to suffer, to never prosper, to watch everything slip through her fingers. I warned her. I told her the price, but she was too consumed by hate to care. What was the price? Yasmin asked hoarsely. Aisha's laugh was bitter. The price is always the same. A piece of her soul, her peace in this life and the next. And, because such contracts require payment, a portion of any wealth her bloodline would ever earn. 20% of all provision, meant for her descendants, would be redirected to feed the jinns who enforced the curse. For eternity, unless the contract was formally dissolved, Yasmin gasped. 20% of everything? For generations? Jinns don't work for free, child. Your mother thought she was clever, using them to harm her sister, but she was the one truly cursed. For 40 years, I've had to send those 7 jinns their portion. Money, food, energy, all extracted from your family line and offered to them in the spiritual realm. Your mother's suffering in the grave isn't just punishment from Allah, though that's certainly part of it. She's also suffering because those jinns are still bound to her by contract, still drawing sustenance from her soul's energy. Fatima felt sick, and when I broke the curse, you broke one side of the contract. The jinns can no longer block your provision, but they're still bound to collect from Zara's line, and now they're angry because they lost their main source of sustenance, your blocked wealth, so they're taking more aggressively from the only source left, Yasmin's family. How do we end it completely? The Imam asked. How do we free both families and release Zara's soul from this torment? Aisha was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns in the sand on the table. There's only one way. All parties must formally dissolve the contract. That means Fatima, as the victim, must forgive. Yasmin, as Zara's heir, must renounce any wealth gained through the curse and ask the jinns for release. And the jinns themselves must be offered a final payment to close the contract and set them free. What kind of payment? Yasmin asked fearfully. Not blood, if that's what you're worried about. These particular jinns aren't those types. They want what they were promised originally, energy, sustenance, but instead of taking it from cursed sources, you offer it willingly from blessed sources. Food given as charity in Zara's name. Money donated to help those who've suffered from envy and black magic. 7 acts of genuine kindness, 1 for each jinn, all done with the intention of breaking the spiritual debt. The Imam nodded slowly. This aligns with Islamic principles. We correct spiritual harm with spiritual good. The challenge will be getting the jinns to appear so we can formally negotiate the dissolution. Aisha smiled grimly. Oh, they'll appear. I'll make sure of that. But you need to understand, when you see them fully materialized, see what your sister bound herself to, it will break something in you. These aren't the cute spirits of children's stories. They're beings of smokeless fire, ancient and powerful, and they're not happy about being servants to human grudges. She stood, moving to a chest in the corner. From it, she pulled out a clay bowl, a knife, and several bundles of herbs. We'll do this tomorrow night when the moon is waning. That's when contracts can be formally dissolved. Between now and then, all 3 of you must fast. No food, only water. Pray continuously. Purify your intentions, because tomorrow night you'll face the full manifestation of envy's consequences. As they left the sorceress's house and drove back to Marrakesh, none of them spoke. They were each lost in their own thoughts, contemplating what tomorrow night would bring. Fatima looked out the window at the desert landscape and remembered something her mother had told her when she was a little girl. The invisible world is always watching, daughter. Everything we do, every word of kindness or cruelty, every act of generosity or envy is witnessed by beings we cannot see. And they remember. Oh, how they remember. Tomorrow night, Fatima would meet the beings who'd remembered her sister's curse for 40 years. The beings who'd stolen her provision, tormented her family, and were now devouring her sister's soul in punishment. Tomorrow night, she would have to look into the eyes of the monsters that jealousy creates and find the strength to offer forgiveness anyway, because that was the only way to break the cycle, the only way to free everyone, living and dead, human and jinn, from the chains that Zara's envy had forged. They returned to Tamentit the following evening, just as the sun was setting and painting the desert the color of old blood. Fatima, Yasmin, and the Imam had fasted all day as instructed, and the hunger made everything feel surreal, dreamlike, or perhaps nightmare-like. Aisha was waiting outside her house, surrounded by a circle drawn in the sand, Quranic verses written in a careful hand. She'd changed into indigo robes that seemed to absorb the fading light. Good, you came, she said. And you fasted? Purified yourselves? They nodded. Then enter the circle. Once we begin, you cannot leave until it's finished, no matter what you see, no matter what appears. Do you understand? We understand, the Imam said firmly. They stepped into the circle, and Aisha closed it behind them, pouring salt along the gap. She lit incense, frankincense mixed with something else, something that smelled ancient and green, and began to chant. Not in Arabic, not in any language Fatima recognized. The sounds were guttural, sharp, like rocks grinding against each other. The air thickened. The temperature dropped despite the desert heat. And then, one by one, they appeared. 7 jinns materialized around the circle's edge. These weren't the shadow forms Fatima had glimpsed the morning she broke the curse. These were fully manifested beings, and they were terrifying. The first was tall and thin, with limbs too long and joints that bent backward. Its face was almost human, but its eyes burned with internal fire. The second was female, Fatima knew somehow, with hair like smoke and a voice like wind through cracks. The others ranged in appearance from almost human to nightmare-made flesh, bodies that flickered between solid and smoke, faces with too many teeth, hands ending in claws of what looked like solidified flame. Yasmin made a small sound of pure terror. Even the imam went pale. But it was the one in the center that made Fatima's blood freeze, because she recognized him. "You," she breathed, "you were the one who appeared to me most often, the one who made my customers turn away. I remember your face." The jinn bowed mockingly. "For 40 years, I stood guard at your gate of provision. A long assignment, I must say. Tedious, watching coins try to reach you and batting them away, watching opportunities present themselves and creating obstacles, all because a jealous woman paid us to make you suffer." His voice was like gravel, but underneath it was something else. Was it regret? Fatigue? "You hated it," Fatima realized suddenly. "You hated doing it." "We are not demons," the female jinn said, her smoke hair writhing. "We are believers, same as you. We mention Allah in our gatherings. We have our own mosques, our own scholars, but we are bound by laws. When a contract is made, we must fulfill it until it's dissolved. Your sister paid the price, spoke the words, made the agreement. We had no choice but to serve." "There is always a choice," the imam said firmly. "Free will is Allah's gift to both humans and jinns." "Easy to say when you're not the one facing punishment from the elders," another jinn growled. "We took the contract because refusing would have meant our own torment. Better to make one human suffer than to suffer ourselves." Aisha stepped forward, her ancient face hard. "The contract is broken on one side. Fatima has reclaimed her provision through ruqyah and faith, but the other side remains, your bond to Zara and her bloodline. We're here to dissolve it completely. What are your terms?" The central jinn, the one who'd guarded Fatima's gate for 40 years, spoke carefully. "We want what was promised, 40 years of payment plus interest from Yasmin's wealth." "No," Yasmin cried out. "I'll be left with nothing." "You already have nothing," the jinn said flatly. "The wealth built on cursed provision is worthless. We're just making it official." "Wait," Fatima interrupted, her heart pounding. "What if I paid instead?" Everyone, human and jinn, stared at her. "The miracle coins," Fatima continued, her voice growing stronger. "Allah gave me provision to replace 40 years of stolen wealth. What if I use it to pay your debt? Would that dissolve the contract?" "Aunt Fatima, no," Yasmin protested. "That's your money. You need it." "I need peace more," Fatima said firmly. She turned to the jinns. "My sister hurt me terribly. Her jealousy poisoned 40 years of my life and made my children suffer. But she's suffering too, trapped by the consequences of her own hatred. If paying you from my blessed provision can free her soul and end this cycle, then I'll do it. Consider it charity. Consider it forgiveness." The jinns looked at each other, communicating in ways Fatima couldn't perceive. Finally, the central one spoke. "Blessed provision given willingly breaks the curse completely. The spiritual laws allow it. But are you certain? You would give up your miracle money to free the woman who cursed you?" Fatima thought about Zara, her older sister who'd died alone and bitter, consumed by the jealousy she'd never released. She thought about the dreams Yasmin described, Zara trapped in fire, screaming about broken contracts. She thought about how envy had destroyed 2 families and bound 7 jinns into a service they'd hated. "Yes," Fatima said quietly. "I'm certain. Let it end here. Let everyone be free." The imam was smiling through tears. "This is true Islam," he whispered. "This is what our faith actually teaches, breaking evil with good, responding to harm with mercy." Aisha began chanting again, and this time the words were clearly Quranic, verses about forgiveness, about mercy, about Allah's infinite compassion. The jinns joined her, their inhuman voices reciting in perfect Arabic, and Yasmin, understanding what was happening, added her own voice. "I renounce any wealth gained through my mother's curse. I ask forgiveness for her. I release these beings from their contract. I accept responsibility for making amends." The air exploded with light. Not physical light, something else, something that came from everywhere and nowhere. Fatima felt something inside her chest loosen, a knot she'd carried for so long she'd forgotten it was there. The weight of 40 years of unexplained suffering lifted all at once. The jinns were changing. Their forms became less nightmarish, more natural. The fire in their eyes dimmed from rage to something like peace. "The contract is dissolved," the central jinn said, and his voice was different now, lighter, almost grateful. 40 years of servitude ends tonight. The debt is paid. The curse is lifted. Zahra's soul is released from our claim. "Will she find peace?" Yasmin asked through tears. "That's between her and Allah now," the jinn said gently. "But at least she's no longer bound to us. Her punishment in the grave will be what she earned through her own choices, not augmented by our continuing claim on her energy. It's mercy, of a sort." One by one, the jinns bowed to Fatima, actual bows of respect. "For 40 years, I made you suffer," the central jinn said to her, "and yet you paid our debt to free us. I will remember this, Fatima al-Mansuri, and should you ever need help that is lawful for me to give, you need only call my name. Sharif al-Marid, servant of Allah, now and always." "I don't even know how to call jinns," Fatima said. Sharif smiled, and it was startling how human he looked when he smiled. "You already know, the same way you broke the curse, with sincere faith and the words of Allah. That's how the righteous ones among us are reached, not through sorcery, but through prayer." And then they were gone, vanished like smoke in wind. The circle remained, but the oppressive weight had lifted. The desert air felt clean again, normal. Aisha slumped against her doorframe, looking somehow older and more fragile. "It's done," she said simply. 40 years of corruption ended in one night. I've witnessed many dissolutions, but never one like this." Yasmin turned to Fatima, and there was something raw and broken in her expression. "You didn't have to do that, after what my mother did to you. Your mother was sick with jealousy," Fatima said gently. "It poisoned her more than it poisoned me. I survived. She didn't. How could I not show mercy when given the chance?" They drove back to Marrakesh in silence, but it was a different silence than before. Peaceful, complete, the kind of silence that comes after a storm has finally passed. When they reached the city, just before the imam dropped them off, Yasmin spoke quietly. "I have nothing now. No wealth, no business. I don't even know how I'll eat tomorrow." Fatima smiled. "Then you'll learn what I learned. That provision comes from Allah alone, not from cursed money or stolen wealth. You'll struggle, but you'll be free, and freedom is worth more than gold." "Will you help me?" Yasmin asked, her voice small. "We're family," Fatima said simply. "Of course I'll help you." And in that moment, as the dawn call to prayer began to echo across Marrakesh, something that had been broken for 40 years finally began to heal. 3 months passed. The story of Fatima's miracle had faded from the headlines, replaced by newer scandals and wonders. But in the Medina, among those who'd witnessed the impossible, Fatima al-Mansuri had become something of a legend. Her date stall thrived, not because of any supernatural intervention now, but simply because the blockage was gone. Customers came naturally. Her prices were fair. Her service was kind. Word spread that buying from the Miracle Woman brought good fortune, not through magic, but because her story inspired people to give charity and treat others well. Yasmin worked alongside her aunt now, learning the date trade from scratch. It was humble work for someone who'd once run an import business. Her hands, soft from years of signing contracts while others did manual labor, had developed calluses. But there was a lightness in her that hadn't been there before. The lightness of someone no longer carrying spiritual debt. "I used to think I'd earned everything," Yasmin confided one morning as they arranged fresh dates. "My success, my wealth. I was so proud, but it was all stolen goods. Spiritually speaking, I was a thief who didn't know she was stealing." "But you know now," Fatima said, "and you're building something real, something blessed." The real test came on an ordinary Thursday afternoon. A man approached the stall, well-dressed, carrying an expensive briefcase. He looked vaguely familiar, but Fatima couldn't place him. "Lala Fatima?" he asked respectfully. "I'm Hassan Benjaloun. I work for a development company. We've been buying properties in the Medina for renovation projects." Fatima felt a flicker of unease. "I rent my stall space. I don't own property. Actually, that's why I'm here." Hassan pulled papers from his briefcase. Your father owned a small plot of land in the Dra Valley, the date groves where you grew up. After his death, ownership passed to you and your sister Zara equally. When Zara died, her portion should have passed to her heir, your niece Yasmin. But there were documentation issues, probate complications. We've been trying to track down the owners for 5 years. Fatima's world tilted slightly. The date groves? But those were sold decades ago after my father died. No, Lala, they were never sold. They've been abandoned, yes, but legally, they still belong to your family. And our company wants to buy them for a new resort development. We're offering a substantial sum, enough that you and your niece would be quite wealthy. He named a figure that made both Fatima and Yasmin gasp. It was more money than they'd see in 10 lifetimes of selling dates. We'd like to finalize this quickly, Hassan continued. I have the contracts here. You and Yasmin sign, we transfer the money within a week. Simple. After he left, giving them 3 days to decide, Yasmin and Fatima sat in stunned silence. It's happening again, Yasmin finally said, her voice strange. Sudden wealth appearing out of nowhere. Aunt Fatima, what if this is another test? What if accepting this money brings back the curse? It's not cursed money, Fatima said thoughtfully. It's legitimately ours, your grandfather's land, passed down properly. But I'm trying to understand why now. Why after 40 years of having nothing, I'm suddenly being offered everything. The miracle coins were one thing. That was clearly divine intervention to break the curse. But this feels different. That night, Fatima couldn't sleep. She prayed tahajjud in the small hours before dawn, asking Allah for guidance. And as she sat on her prayer mat, she remembered something the old woman, the one who'd given her the ruqyah verses, had said. When Allah opens the door, remember that envy is a poison. Break the cycle. Suddenly, Fatima understood. This wasn't just about her and Yasmin becoming wealthy. It was about how they would handle wealth after everything they'd learned about its dangers. The next morning, she called a family meeting. Not just Yasmin, but all her children and their families. The imam who'd helped them was also invited. They gathered in the small courtyard behind Fatima's rented room, and she explained the situation. Allah has given us a choice, Fatima said when she'd finished describing the land sale offer. We can accept this money and use it selfishly, the way my sister Zara would have. Or we can accept it and use it as a trust, a way to break the cycle of envy and greed that destroyed our family once before. What are you proposing, Mama? Her eldest son asked. I propose we take the money, but we don't keep all of it. We keep enough to live comfortably, pay off debts, buy modest homes, ensure our children's education. The rest, we create a foundation, a charity that helps people trapped by spiritual warfare, envy, and black magic. We fund legitimate ruqyahs who do Allah's work without charging exploitative fees. We support families destroyed by jealousy and help them rebuild. The imam was smiling, using the provision to heal the very wounds that blocked your provision in the first place. This is beautiful, Fatima. But Aunt Fatima, Yasmin protested, we've both struggled so much. Don't we deserve to enjoy this money? To live well after all the suffering? We do deserve to live well, Fatima agreed. And we will. But living well doesn't mean hoarding wealth while others suffer the way we suffered. True blessing isn't in accumulation, it's in circulation. The more we give, the more Allah provides. That's the real lesson of the miracle coins. They appeared when I had nothing, when I was willing to give my last piece of bread to a hungry child. Provision flows to generous hearts. Her children looked at each other. One of her daughters spoke. Mama, for 40 years you watched us struggle because of Aunt Zara's envy. You have every right to be bitter, to want to keep everything for family. Why are you choosing this? Fatima thought carefully before answering. Because I saw what envy did to my sister. It ate her alive from the inside. It destroyed her peace in this life and the next. And I refuse to let that poison continue in our family line. This isn't just about breaking a curse. It's about breaking the pattern that made the curse possible in the first place. After hours of discussion, they voted. Unanimously, the family agreed to Fatima's plan. They would take the money, keep a reasonable portion, and use the rest to help others. 3 days later, when Hassan Ben Jaloun returned for their answer, Fatima signed the contracts with a clear conscience and a full heart. The money transferred, the foundation was established, and Fatima al-Mansuri, who'd spent 73 years in poverty, discovered something surprising about wealth. It was much easier to carry when you weren't clutching it with closed fists. But the real miracle, the one that would echo through generations, was still to come. Because when you break a cycle of generational curse and replace it with generational blessing, the effects ripple far beyond anything you can imagine. A year after the land sale, the Al-Mansouri Family Foundation was thriving. They'd helped 15 families trapped by black magic contracts, funded 3 legitimate ruqyahs to work full-time, and published a booklet, approved by the imam and local scholars, explaining the Islamic perspective on spiritual warfare and protection. Fatima had moved out of her tiny rented room and into a modest house with Yasmin, who managed the foundation's day-to-day operation. They still kept the date stall in the Medina, but now it was run by a young widow they'd hired, giving her a source of income and dignity. But the most surprising consequence came on a Tuesday afternoon when a young woman arrived at the foundation's office, led by a frantic-looking mother. "Please," the mother begged, "you helped my neighbor's family last month. They told me you might be able to help my daughter. She's been affected by something." The daughter, maybe 19 years old, stood motionless, her eyes vacant. Fatima recognized the signs immediately. Spiritual attack, possibly possession. "We'll help," Fatima said. "But first, tell me what happened." The story was painfully familiar. A jealous friend, words spoken in anger, visits to a sorcerer. The girl had been fine one day and completely changed the next. Silent, withdrawn, refusing to eat, staring at nothing for hours. "This is exactly what happened to me," Yasmin said quietly, after the mother and daughter left with an appointment scheduled for the next day. "Not possession, but curse, the invisible chains that wrapped around our family, and now we can help others escape them." That evening, as Fatima performed Maghrib prayer, she reflected on how far they'd come. The miracle coins had been just the beginning. The real miracle was what came after, the choice to transform suffering into service, curse into blessing, generational pain into generational healing. "Aunt Fatima?" Yasmin called from the kitchen. "There's someone at the door." Fatima opened it to find Abraham, her old neighbor from the Medina. His leather goods business had been sold. He was retiring, returning to his family in Israel. "I wanted to say goodbye," he said, his weathered face kind. "And to tell you something I've been thinking about for months. You know I'm Jewish, Fatima. We don't believe all the same things, but what you did, breaking that curse, forgiving your sister, using your blessing to help others, that's the kind of faith that transcends religion. That's the kind of faith that actually changes the world." "Thank you, Abraham," Fatima said, embracing her old friend. "You were one of the few who saw me when I was invisible. I'll never forget that." After Abraham left, Fatima stood in her small garden and marveled at the strange path her life had taken. 74 years old now, she'd lived through colonial rule, independence, poverty, miracles, and transformation. She'd seen jinns face to face and lived to tell the tale. She'd broken a generational curse and started a generational blessing, but perhaps the most profound change was internal. The bitterness she'd carried for so long, the "why me" that had echoed through 40 years, was gone. In its place was understanding, acceptance, and purpose. Her phone rang. It was her eldest son, calling from his newly reopened carpentry shop. "Mama, I just got a contract to build furniture for a new school, the biggest job I've ever had. They specifically asked for me because they heard about our family's story, about how we turned suffering into service." After they hung up, Fatima's second son called, then her eldest daughter. One by one, her children reported similar news, opportunities opening, businesses thriving, not through miraculous intervention, but through the natural blessings that flow when generational curses are broken and replaced with righteousness. "The pattern has truly reversed," the imam said when Fatima met with him later that week to discuss the foundation's work. "Your family suffered for 40 years because of one woman's envy, but now your family will thrive for generations because of one woman's forgiveness. The spiritual mathematics are elegant in their justice." "I don't want credit for this," Fatima protested. "It was Allah's mercy, not my virtue." "It was both," the imam corrected gently. "Allah's mercy gave you the opportunity. Your choice determined what you did with it. Many people receive blessings and squander them. You received a blessing and multiplied it. That matters." 6 months later, Fatima received a letter that made her cry. It was from a woman in Egypt, a stranger, who'd heard about the foundation and the story of the miracle coins. She wrote, "I've been suffering from unexplained poverty for 15 years. Every job fails. Every business collapses. Reading your story made me realize it's not bad luck. It's spiritual blockage. I found a legitimate ruqyah, performed ruqyah, and for the first time in 15 years, I got a job that lasted more than a month. Your story gave me hope when I'd given up. May Allah reward you for sharing what you learned." Yasmin, reading over her aunt's shoulder, whispered, "One miracle is touching thousands of lives. The coins were just the beginning." "No," Fatima corrected with a smile. "The coins were just visible proof of what was always true, that Allah's provision can never be truly blocked, only delayed. And when it comes in ways that transform not just individuals, but entire communities." That night, Fatima had a dream. She was standing in the Medina, at her old stall, and coins were appearing from the sand again. But this time, she wasn't collecting them for herself. She was distributing them to a line of people that stretched as far as she could see, people trapped by curses, bound by envy, suffering from spiritual warfare. And as each person received their coin, chains fell away from their wrists, invisible walls crumbled, and light broke through darkness. She woke with tears on her face and a profound sense of completion. Her 74 years of life had led to this moment, this purpose. Everything, even the suffering, even the curse, had been preparation for the work she was doing now. And somewhere in the unseen world, she liked to imagine that Zara was finally at peace, freed from the consequences of her jealousy, forgiven not just by Allah, but by the sister she'd tried to destroy. Because that's what breaking generational curses really means. Not just stopping the suffering, but transforming it into something that heals the very wounds that created the suffering in the first place. The cycle was broken, the pattern reversed, and the miracle continued, one act of mercy at a time. 2 years after the miracle coins first appeared, Fatima al-Mansouri celebrated her 75th birthday surrounded by family, friends, and dozens of people whose lives had been touched by the foundation's work. The celebration took place in the courtyard of the new Foundation Center, a renovated riad in the Medina that served as offices, counseling space, and a library of Islamic texts on spiritual protection. The walls were painted in traditional Moroccan colors, and a fountain, a real one, not a cursed well, bubbled peacefully in the center. "Make a speech, Khalti Fatima," someone called out. Fatima stood, leaning slightly on her cane. Age was catching up with her. Her joints ached more, her eyesight was dimming, but her spirit was lighter than it had been in 70 years. "What can I say that you all don't already know?" she began, her voice still strong. "You've heard the story. Poor old woman, cursed by jealousy, saved by faith, coins appearing from sand, dramatic confrontations with jinns. It sounds like a fairy tale." "But it was real," someone shouted, and laughter rippled through the crowd. "Yes, it was real. But here's what I've learned in these 2 years since. The real miracle wasn't the coins. The real miracle is this." She gestured at the gathering. "All of you. The foundation. The families we've helped. The knowledge we've shared. The cycle we broke." She paused, finding Yasmin in the crowd. Her niece had transformed completely, from a bitter, desperate woman who'd lost everything to a confident, compassionate leader of the Foundation's programs. "My sister Zara lived her whole life consumed by envy," Fatima continued. "It poisoned every blessing she received. She had wealth but no peace, success but no joy, and in the end, that envy destroyed her. But you know what? I forgive her, completely. Because her suffering taught me something I could never have learned otherwise, that the greatest wealth isn't in your bank account. It's in your heart, in your relationships, in your ability to sleep peacefully at night, knowing you've harmed no one and helped many." The Imam, now elderly himself, stood to add his words. Fatima's story reminds us that we live in both the physical and spiritual worlds simultaneously. Most of us focus only on the visible, the money we earn, the status we achieve, the things we accumulate, but the invisible world is just as real, just as important. Every act of envy, every curse spoken in anger, every deal made with dark forces, these create real consequences that can last generations. But so does every act of forgiveness, every prayer recited with sincere faith, every choice to break cycles of harm rather than perpetuating them. After the celebration, as the guests departed and the sun set over the Medina, Fatima sat by the fountain with her closest family, her children, her grandchildren, Yasmin and her 2 daughters. "Tell me honestly," Fatima said to them, "are you happy? Not wealthy happy, not comfortable happy, but truly happy." One by one they nodded, and she could see it in their eyes. They were. The curse that had hung over the family for 40 years was gone. In its place was something precious: freedom. The freedom to succeed or fail based on their own efforts, the freedom to make mistakes without invisible forces amplifying them, the freedom to sleep peacefully without spiritual harassment. "Grandmother," her youngest grandson asked. He was 6 years old, bright-eyed and curious. "Is it true you saw real jinns?" "Yes, Habibi. Very real, very frightening jinns." "Were they bad?" Fatima considered the question. "They weren't bad or good exactly. They were trapped, following orders they didn't want to follow, bound by contracts that weren't fair to anyone. Just like people, some jinns are righteous and some are not. But all of them, good or bad, must obey the words of Allah. That's why ruqyah works, because it reminds everyone, physical and spiritual, who's really in control. Allah, the boy said confidently. Exactly. Never forget that, my darling. No curse is stronger than Allah's mercy. No magic is more powerful than sincere faith. No darkness can stand against the light of truth. 3 years later, Fatima al-Mansuri died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78. She was discovered by Yasmin, who'd come to wake her for Fajr prayer, and found her aunt lying peacefully, a slight smile on her weathered face. The funeral was attended by hundreds. People came from across Morocco, families the foundation had helped, scholars who'd been inspired by her story, ordinary people who'd heard about the miracle coins and wanted to pay respects to the woman who'd shown them that faith could break any curse. The Imam gave the funeral prayer and said, "Fatima al-Mansuri lived 78 years. 40 of them were spent in suffering, but the last few years were spent in service. And because of that, her legacy will last not just for her lifetime, but for generations. She turned her pain into purpose, her curse into curriculum. She taught us that the greatest jihad, the greatest struggle, is not against external enemies, but against the invisible chains we allow to bind us: envy, bitterness, despair. And she showed us how to break those chains, with faith, forgiveness, and an absolute trust in Allah's wisdom." They buried her in the old cemetery near the Kutubiyya Mosque, where the call to prayer echoed 5 times daily over her grave. And on her simple headstone, they inscribed just one line: "She broke the curse and chose mercy." But Fatima's story didn't end with her death. The foundation continued, run now by Yasmin and Fatima's children. It expanded to other cities, then other countries. The booklet they'd published about spiritual protection was translated into 12 languages. Scholars began citing Fatima's case in their lessons about the reality of spiritual warfare and the power of ruqyah. And sometimes, in the Medina near where Fatima's old date stall had stood, people swore they could still see coins appearing in the sand. Not real coins, but shimmers of light that appeared when someone desperately prayed for provision, as if Fatima's miracle had left an echo in the physical world, a reminder that Allah's mercy is always there, always available, always just one sincere prayer away. The invisible world remembered Fatima al-Mansuri. The jinns she'd freed spoke of her with respect. The sorceress Aisha, in the last years of her life, stopped taking clients and spent her time helping people break curses instead of creating them, inspired by the mercy she'd witnessed that night in the desert. And in homes across Morocco and beyond, mothers told their daughters Fatima's story, not as a fairy tale, but as a true account of what happens when you choose faith over fear, forgiveness over vengeance, and generosity over greed. The curse was broken, the cycle ended, and in its place, a new pattern began, a pattern of blessing that would ripple through generations, all because one elderly woman decided that mercy was more powerful than any magic, and that breaking cycles of harm was more important than perpetuating them. Today, if you visit Marrakech's Medina, you'll find a small plaque near Jama El Fna Square. It marks the spot where Fatima al-Mansuri's date stall once stood, where miracle coins appeared from sand, where an invisible curse was broken by visible faith. Tourists photograph it, locals touch it for blessing, and those who know the full story understand what it truly commemorates. Not just a miracle, but a choice. The choice to respond to 40 years of suffering with forgiveness instead of bitterness. The choice to use unexpected wealth to help others rather than hoarding it selfishly. The choice to break a generational curse by starting a generational blessing. But what does Fatima's story mean for you? For us? For anyone listening to these words? First, understand this. Spiritual blockage is real. The invisible world is real. Jinns are real. Curses born from envy are real. You can dismiss them as superstition, but that won't make them disappear. The Quran speaks clearly about these things, not to frighten us, but to make us aware. To teach us that we live in a world with layers, with dimensions we can't see, but that affect us daily. If you've struggled your entire life despite working hard, despite being good, despite doing everything right, and nothing makes sense, consider that your struggle might not be purely physical. Maybe there's spiritual blockage caused by envy, by someone's ill wishes, by agreements made with jinns that you don't even know about. This isn't paranoia, it's awareness. Second, learn from Fatima's solution. She didn't fight dark magic with darker magic. She didn't go to another sorcerer for revenge. She didn't make her own deals with jinns. She returned to the purest source, the words of Allah, ruqyah, the verses of the Quran recited with complete faith and absolute trust that Allah's power supersedes all creation. The verses Fatima used are available to all of us. Surah al-Ruqyah for provision, Surah ar-Rahman for blessings, Ayat al-Kursi for protection. These aren't magical spells, they're reminders of truth. They work not because of the sounds of the words, but because of what the words mean and who spoke them originally, Allah Himself. Third, remember the price of envy. Zahra's jealousy destroyed her own life more than it destroyed Fatima's. She lived in bitterness, died in misery, and suffered after death because of choices made in a moment of intense emotion. Every time you feel envy rising, and we all do, we're human, remember Zahra. Remember that envy is a poison you drink hoping someone else will die. Instead, when you see someone blessed with something you desire, make dua for them. Say, MashaAllah, may Allah increase them. That simple act protects both of you. It protects them from your potential evil eye, and it protects you from the spiritual poison of envy. Fourth, understand the power of forgiveness. Not the cheap forgiveness where you say the words, but hold resentment in your heart. Real forgiveness. The kind where you wish good for the person who harmed you. The kind where you use your blessings to free them from the consequences of their own mistakes. Fatima could have refused to pay the jinn's debt. She could have said, let Zahra suffer, she earned it. But she chose mercy. And that choice didn't just free Zahra's tormented soul. It freed Fatima herself from the weight of bitterness. It freed the jinns from service they hated. It freed Yasmin from a debt she didn't know she owed. One act of forgiveness rippled across both worlds, physical and spiritual, healing wounds decades old. Finally, remember this: provision comes from Allah alone, not from your job, not from your business, not from your investments. Those are just means. The actual source is Allah, and no creation, human or jinn, sorcerer or demon, can block what Allah wills to provide. But here's the secret Fatima discovered. Provision flows most freely to generous hearts. When you give despite having little, when you help others despite your own struggles, when you choose mercy over hoarding, that's when Allah's provision becomes unstoppable. The miracle coins appeared when Fatima had given her last bread to a hungry child. The land sale came after she'd already started thinking about how to help others. Generosity isn't giving from your excess, it's giving from your need, trusting that Allah will replace what you've given with something better. That trust, that faith, that absolute conviction that Allah sees you and will provide, that's what breaks spiritual blockages and opens the doors of sustenance. So I ask you now, what invisible chains are binding your provision? What envy are you carrying that's poisoning your blessings? What forgiveness are you withholding that keeps you trapped in bitterness? What generosity are you resisting that would open floodgates of blessing? Fatima al-Mansuri's story isn't just about one elderly woman in Morocco. It's about all of us, about the spiritual battles we don't see, about the power we have through faith to break curses and start blessings, about the choice between being controlled by invisible forces or controlling our response to them through trust in Allah. The miracle coins that appeared in the sand weren't just provision for Fatima, they were a sign for all of us, a physical manifestation of a spiritual truth that Allah's mercy can appear anywhere, anytime, in any form, when we approach Him with sincere faith and complete trust. Don't let envy control your life. Don't let spiritual blockage go unaddressed. Don't let generational curses continue through ignorance. Learn ruqyah. Protect yourself and your family with the words of Allah. Practice gratitude instead of envy. Choose forgiveness over bitterness. Give generously even when you have little, because the invisible world is watching. The jinns are listening, and Allah is always, always aware of what's in your heart. If this story has touched your heart, share it with others who might need to hear it. Subscribe to this channel if you want more stories about faith, spiritual reality, and the unseen world that surrounds us. Leave a comment telling me, have you ever experienced unexplained blockage in your life? Have you ever realized that your struggles might have spiritual dimensions? Most importantly, if you're suffering now, if you feel like invisible walls surround your provision, your success, your peace, don't give up. Learn from Fatima. Return to the Quran. Recite with faith. Trust in Allah's power over all creation. And remember, no curse is stronger than Allah's mercy. No magic is more powerful than sincere faith. No darkness can stand against the light of truth. May Allah protect us all from envy, both from being envied and from envying others. May He break any spiritual blockages affecting our lives and our families. May He give us the strength to forgive those who wrong us and the wisdom to use our blessings to help others. And may we all remember the lesson of Fatima al-Mansuri, that the greatest miracle isn't money appearing from sand, but a heart choosing mercy when it could choose vengeance, choosing generosity when it could choose greed, and choosing faith when everything visible suggests despair. The coins were real, the curse was real, the jinns were real, but the most real thing, the most powerful thing, was the faith of one elderly woman who decided that Allah's promise was more trustworthy than 40 years of evidence to the contrary. Be that person. Have that faith. Break those cycles, and watch as your own miracle coins begin to appear from the sand of your life, whether they come in the form of money, peace, relationships, or simply the joy of knowing that you've chosen righteousness over revenge. Assalamu alaikum. May peace, blessings, and provision be upon you all. And remember, the invisible world is always watching. Make sure what it sees is worthy of recording.